Hello, everyone. I'm Mystery.
And I am Mortem of the Authenticator, and we're the Duality of Man. Oh
Yeah, so
boy, this one.
today we're going to be looking at populism, specifically the debate between Nancy Pelosi and Winston Marshall at the Oxford Union. There were other people debating the same topic as well, but these are the two that we're going to be focusing on today.
Because they're so very, very emblematic of the current brain rot.
Yeah, I'm still getting some static from you.
Shit.
Could it be your connection?
It could be. We are getting a storm right now. That might be it.
Yeah, that might be it. Well, we'll just try our best then.
Hmm.
All right. So I'm going to play, and we're all going to suffer through and analyze Nancy Pelosi's absolutely inane position against populism. Shocker.
Because let it never be said that we were never chivalrous on the Duality of Man. Ladies first.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing that is so sad about all of this. These people who are populist and go out there and make all these claims take advantage of people who have legitimate economic concerns.
Hold on a second there. I was getting some static on my playthrough. Were you hearing static from the video?
I was getting a little bit of it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just me.
No, it's not just you. I got it too.
Okay.
But to your point, Ms. Pelosi, did it ever occur to you that speaking to people with economic issues is not taking advantage of them? It is, in fact, attempting to address them, like, a politician is supposed to have done.
Yeah. I mean,
Because,
just because Pelosi is so rich that she no longer has to concern herself with issues of economics doesn't mean the average person doesn't.
and this is right at the heart, right at the dead set heart of this whole thing, in the sense that she considers populism to be a bad thing, and yet somehow will wax absolute lyrical about how wonderful our democracy is. Now, I don't know if she's ever taken Latin or Greek, but demos, from which we derive the word democracy, is the Latinization, or rather the Greekization of the Latin word populus, from which the word populism is derived. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. I'm gonna play again.
I now look to the Speaker Emerita, Nancy Pelosi, to close the case for the proposition.
Good evening. Thank you all very much for this very stimulating evening. Mr. President, congratulations to you and your officers for bringing us together to discuss this very important challenge. The proposition says that it is a threat to democracy. It didn't say it will cause it. It said it is a threat. So remember what the proposition is. Now listened attentively to our two friends here in their description of populism, and our white tie and tail gentleman and his comments. And you know what? They make a very compelling argument. It would have been so appropriate 200 years ago in the time of Andrew Jackson. It's an old notion of populism. For today, I always like to put down temporal markers. For today, how populism weighs in is in a way that is different. Voltaire said, if you want to debate with me, define your terms. Well, let's define what is happening with populism today. Populism is sprung on some of the people that have been named here, put forth with an ethno-nationalist populism.
That is your assertion, you unctuous bint. No one else, and certainly no one in favor of populism, has made such a claim, with the possible exception of the crazies like Richard Spencer and Andrew Anglin, who are so irrelevant as to be mockable. But the cut and thrust of what you just said there, my darling, is that populism in every other instance that it has occurred throughout history has been good, MK, but this one is bad because it's going in a direction I don't like.
Yes, populism is great until it's opposed to me, in which case it must be demonized and admonished.
And demoralized and subhumanized as much as fucking possible.
It is the thing, like all these, like all the big, populist politicians in America, really, none of them are really doing it from a ethno-nationalist bent. I mean, that's certainly the claims that their, opponents on the opposite side are saying, but like when you hear from their own mouth, it's literally not what any of them are saying.
Yes. Not at all. Not in the slightest. Because again, only the crazies like your Richard Spencers, your Andrew Anglins, and your AFAs are going to make those sorts of claims. And nobody, jack shit, nobody on anything like an institutional scale takes them in the least bit seriously because they are twats. And yet you are so ready, willing, and apparently gleeful to fight Nazis. You will take Richard Spencer and Andrew Anglin and their ilk seriously, rather than simply conceive of the notion that just like every other time elitists have fought populists throughout history, the populists are usually right and speaking to something true and real on the ground that affects most people, and the elitists are out of touch aristocratic snobs who would rather blow their nose with academic papers than ever actually address reality.
Yeah, it's funny that when you look at the polling statistics, the populists are becoming more diverse, and the elitist progressives are becoming more white.
Despite the constant moral fixation on identity done by the elitists and the constant imposition that we probably should just not care and be as neutral as possible on the subject of identity among the populists. It's almost as though ignoring racism, stroke sexism, stroke whatever the fuck else identitarianism is how we solve the issue, like we did in the 90s,
Yeah,
and not hyper-fixating on it academically.
It's also maybe acknowledging that people have higher concerns about putting food in on their children's plates. When you can't feed your kids, your highest concern really isn't, hey, that guy told an off-color joke about my race.
And again, highfalutin academic abstract morality seems to take a back seat when the rent is due on the first, so to speak. But the elitist cunts can only fixate on abstract moralizing because it's literally the only force in their sphere of influence that actually can affect them. Because they've been inside that bubble for so long, they don't even remember that the people they don't like are equally as human as they are. Anyway, moving forward, though, we have a lot of this to get through.
Yeah, speaking of elitist cunts, let's get back to Pelosi.
Uh-huh.
In our country, we see nationalism, isolationism. We had a fight to get the bill that we got last week, and generated by an ethnic negativity about immigrants, incumbents too, immigrants, people who are different from them, these people, and the rest.
Yeah, because
Sweetheart,
a lot of
they're
them are coming
different.
over. A lot of them are coming over illegally and committing crimes and actually hurting and even killing people. Like you tell me this is coming purely because they're born in a foreign nation. Like no, she is such a lying, evil, despicable woman.
And further to the point, Nancy, my darling, who do you think the average cleaning lady has more in common with? The working class lads who prefer Trump, or your donor class? Because here's the thing. Here's the really ironic thing here. A large part of the reason that the Democrats and the Unipartyists in general are in favor of this shit is because they think it will solidify their vote or give them a underclass to exploit. But when push comes to shove, when the rubber meets the road, very often, especially in America, when we get immigrants, it's from places like Mexico and South America, and a lot of them are very hyper traditionalist Catholics who then tend to vote for people like Trump.
And here's the thing: like, she tries to divide this along racial lines, but when you take a poll of Hispanic Americans, they are largely anti-immigration.
Because they understand that the more people from home that show up here, the less likely it is that here is going to remain like here be. Also, just a small note here again, going back to something else that she said, isolationism, quote unquote, or more accurately, non-interventionism, is a good thing, you cunt. It is how we prevent warmongering. But then again, I forget who I'm talking to. The
This,
secondary queen of the warmongers, second only to Hillary fucking Clinton.
hold on. There's actually a quote from a former president. See if I can find it. Who mentions a lot about that specific thing? Let's see if I can go back and find this quote. It was from a while ago, so I don't know if I'll be able to. Uh, it was on Twitter. I bookmarked it. Let's see. Man, this must have been from a long time ago. Scrolling. It's definitely from a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I'm trying to find it because it was such a good quote for this, literally what you just said. See. I just found it. See. Wherever the standard of freedom, at least from John Quincy Adams, and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will be her heart, her benedictions, and her prayers, talking about America. But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own. She will commend the general cause by the countenance of her voice and the benefit sympathy of her example. She well knows that by once enlisting under others' banners than her own, were they even the banners of foreign independence, she would involve herself, beyond the power of extrication, in all the wars of interest and intrigue, of individual avarice, envy, and ambition, which assume the colors and usurp the standard of freedom. By God, did he fucking call that shit?
Godspeed to the younger Adams. God damn it. But yeah, the 17th century based man aside, yeah, very much in this modern age, it very much does seem like a choice between non-interventionism and bloated authoritarian, useless, stupid, and often costly warmongering. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but on the ground here among the plebs, we don't like the endless goddamn wars. We don't care if there's a war going on in East Asia. We just want to be left alone and to, by extension, leave everyone else the fuck alone. Most of us would rather the adage of good fences make good neighbors be a thing, i.e., rather than interventionally going over and storing up all sorts of shit abroad, we focus on building up the walls. here at home so that people from the outside can't get in and can't start shit. That's the anti-interventionist or isolationist position, Miss Pelosi. But then again, the Duchess of warmongering is who we are fucking talking to. So I'm sure that would fall on deaf ears.
Yeah,
Not that
I
she'd be
don't.
listening to two schmucks like us in the first place, but
Yeah, I don't understand. Like, this is why the Congress is such a big problem, because oftentimes these people are going to vote on things that are utterly disconnected to you. And if something goes bad, they're not the ones who are going to be suffering the consequences. And when you don't suffer the consequences from these things, you really don't care all that much about the effects of it.
they become foreign to you,
Yeah.
as do the people who actually do suffer the consequences, which is people who get drafted into wars, for example, Miss Pelosi. Anyway,
Yeah.
moving on to the next stupid thing she says.
Our problem with, I don't think mob rule is a definition of democracy. What is democracy? Let's define democracy. Democracy is the rule of law. Democracy is free and fair elections. Democracy is about the independent judiciary. It's about freedom of the press, to have transparency and to have accountability of elected officials to the people.
I'm over here rolling my
It's
eyes.
about all of
Yeah,
that. And that
the
is
desire to explode is rapidly rising here. Miss Pelosi, as I have gone over many, many times over, democracy comes from the Greek word demos, meaning the plebeians, the underclass, etc. And the Latin equivalent of such a word is populus, which is the root word of populism. And this is why it gets a bee in my bonnet every time I hear someone trying to wage democracy against populism, because that is a fundamental contradiction in terms. First of all, when the freedom of the press was instituted, it didn't mean the freedom of a fifth estate style journalist class. It meant literally anyone who could buy and own a printing press, because at that time, at the time when the freedom of the press was instilled, it was the most emergent piece of information technology they had at their disposal, en masse. And literally every fucker could have, if they wanted one, a newspaper or a column or, in modern parlance, a blog. And you are taking that freedom of the press, which is specifically to emancipate the individual, the grassroots individual, the person on the ground, and you are bequeathing it only to the halls of officialdom and that aforementioned fifth estate, the stenographers to power that is the modern mainstream media complex. And that is one of the many reasons why your definition of democracy is so self-contradictory and fucked, because you literally view democracy as essentially a crystallization or a calcifization of the norm, and therefore anything that is against the norm cannot be considered democracy in your eyes. And
Look,
it is not so, either definitionally or historically or etymologically or implicitly, my dear. If you look at these things in their historical context, in their linguistic context, in their philosophical context, or even just their sentimental context, you are wrong. You are self-evidently an elitist who hates the people, who hates the plebs, who hates the unwashed masses and the unmentionables from being able to refute you from your pseudo aristocratic position. And that is the position of an aristocrat. It is not the position of a democratically elected public servant, which is what politicians in a democracy or a populist system are supposed to be. You are a steward who is trying her darndest to deny the return of the people who gave you that stewardship in terms of the public discourse. And I'm going to quote from my buddy Tolkien here. Steward, the authority is not given to you to deny the return of the kings. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
Everything that the populist regime in Washington, D.C. is against. Populism, no thank you. Populism is about fighting the ethno-nationalistic populism, as is the threat to democracy, is a
Okay, I want to just point out one thing.
Go
They
ahead.
weren't talking, like, the point of the thing isn't ethno-nationalist populism. The point of the thing is whether populism itself is good or bad. She is, like, trying to tie ethno-nationalism and populism together as if they are inseparable.
Yeah, as if the only people who have ever deferred to the downtrodden and the unrepresented and the unwashed and the unmentionable was as if Hitler and Mussolini and company were the first politicians in Western history to ever use the rhetoric of speaking for the dispossessed to get their ends away. And as if that is the only way in which that tactic can be used. Even though she herself has to acknowledge that populism has been good literally every other time it's occurred throughout history, it doesn't seem to click in her head. She doesn't have her like Mitchell and Webb moment of, wait, am I the bad guy? Because the second she puts two and two together and gets something other than 5, she would have to realize that she and her ilk and the Uniparty in general is on the wrong side of history, so to speak. I hate that phrase, but in this instance, it's somewhat apt, actually, because in every other time throughout history, populism has been good, okay? Except this time, because I don't like the way it's going this time, because it makes me seem like I might be the bad guy. Proceed with no self-awareness.
Yeah, and there's a reason why populist parties are on the rise all over across Europe because we have a bunch of elitists who do not give a damn about the desires of the people, and eventually they had enough. Like
The
people
voice
like
of the people
Pelosi.
will be heard, and the authority is not given to you to deny the return of the king, so to speak. And in a
Yes,
populist or democratic country, the kings are supposed to be the people. The servants are supposed to be the politicians. And you have completely flipped that on its head, Miss Pelosi, you and your ilk. And all
yes,
we're trying to do is redress that flipping that you did.
yes. Nancy Pelosi is the corrupt system that populists are running against. So, of course, she is going to his. But it's like saying, yeah, you see my enemy over there? He's bad.
Yeah, the let them eat cake vibes intensifies exponentially when I listen to this woman talk. Anyway, moving forward.
about threatening what they call elites, a free press. No thanks. Free press. It's about fighting issues that relate to free and fair elections, where we have voter suppression to the nth degree under this regime.
You mean
And
like
the resistance
fortifying
to
elections, Miss Pelosi?
Yes, the shadow campaign is mentioned in Time magazine.
The thing that Time magazine pretty much all but admitted to because they wanted pats on the head for it because they thought they were doing a good thing.
Yeah, and the voter suppression argument is such bullshit. That's literally something only like ignorant white liberals believe. Because like, do you remember the video of the guy talking to white kids at like a liberal college and asking why voter suppression is bad, and they said, "Oh, because black people can't get IDs." And then they go to talk on the street and talk to the average black person. He's like, "Yeah, you know I can get an ID." He's like, "Yeah, it's over at the DMV. You just go down that road. Take a right. There's 2 blocks over, and it says big, gray building with DMV on the side. Yeah, you go there." So like, and the black people like couldn't understand why people thought that they couldn't get IDs and found it extremely insulting, which it is because it's absolutely fucking ridiculous. Like
It's
the voter
literally
suppression.
sorry.
Yeah, the
It's
voter suppression argument literally only exists to demonize the opposition. There's literally no bearing and truth about that. And considering how many people we have, flooding our borders, and I'm pretty sure I've seen, papers, telling illegal immigrants how to vote and to vote for Joe Biden. Like, I'm sorry, like there should absolutely be voter ID laws because it's the only way to ensure that the people that are being elected is a reflection of the will of the citizenry, emphasis on citizenry of the United States of America.
Yeah, not to mention, if you're so worried about voter suppression and cooking the books of the numbers, so to speak, Miss Pelosi, why is it that in your 40, 50 years of being a politician, you have not done a single thing about gerrymandering except to make the problem exponentially worse because you believe in this thing called demographic voting blocks? How how does gerrymandering not manifest itself as a form of voter suppression if we're so concerned about voter suppression all of fucking sudden? Oh no, wait, we're only concerned about voter suppression as and when it looks like it might be going the opposite direction than the one we like because we're a bunch of elitist pseudo aristocratic cunts who are career politicians. Moving forward.
Yeah, and she mentioned, about how important the rule of law is. Nancy Pelosi does not give a damn about the rule of law. This woman will literally try to do whatever she wants. And if you call her out on it, like all she's gonna do is try and use her media team to spit it back on you and figure out how you're misogynist or racist or
Be,
whatever the fuck
because
because it's absolutely.
because because Miss Pelosi appears to be in a same mindset as her old buddy Sheev when she says things like "I am the Senate." She
Yes.
believes she believes in the rule of law, but only insofar as she believes and knows that the law is basically synonymous with what she wants and her own positions. The second the law looks like it might be bending in the opposite direction, the law is either ignored or straight up revoked, and
Yeah.
usually just flat out contradicted.
Yeah. Back in the pandemic where all the businesses were shut down and people couldn't make money, Nancy Pelosi conveniently had her hairdresser reopened specifically for her so she could get her hair done, while other people could barely go out of their own homes.
And what correct me if I'm wrong, but she wasn't even wearing a mask during this period, was she?
I think she might have been, but I think she took it off as soon as she was inside.
Uh-huh. So yeah, as usual, milady, it seems like one rule for the plebs, for the unwashed peasants, and another rule entirely for the quote unquote elected aristocrats.
Yeah, and also Nancy Pelosi is from California, the bane of the union, which is a sanctuary state, which is a state that refuses to comply with federal authorities in the arrest of people who have come in through the southern border in direct violation of federal law. So where's the
I'm
law
just
and order in that one, Nancy?
I'm just gonna make this suggestion once again. A few hundred nukes in the San Andreas fault line set off relatively concordantly with each other would send California to the bottom of the ocean like goddamn Numenor. Just pointing it out.
I would say not quite like Numenor, as Numenor actually had a lot of great things in it.
Well, at one point, I'm sure California did too. It wasn't always the wretched Hanscom ability it is today.
Yeah. All right.
Next.
Passing the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Act, all of that, because they want to contain who votes. Now, the issue of independent judiciary. We owe so much to the UK, or England as it was, when it put forth so many things at Runnymede, England. And one of them was trial by jury. When King John came, the barons who were there they had 12 chairs. And what sprang from that was a jury of your peers, 12 peers. And that sprang from the Magna Carta, and something that we hold dear in our country. Right now, we see trial by jury threatened by vicious assaults on the jurors.
Because, Ms. Pelosi, we are at least partially aware of the notion that judges, just like every other motherfucker, are human beings with their own biases. And if an entire institution can be persuaded to be morally or intellectually biased, then a fair trial is not what will result from it. Do you see? When everyone agrees to the same thing, and that thing happens to be wrong, it doesn't change the fact that that thing is wrong, nor does it suddenly make the institution suddenly infallible. If everyone in the official club is agreed on something that is wrong or immoral, that doesn't change the fact that it's wrong or immoral. And so there has to be a higher standard than just everyone in this institution agrees, and norms and derp and decorum and derp. Because you see, there's this thing called objective reality, objective reasoning, objective logic, and people's ideological biases and corruption can indeed get in the way of these things. And so when their corruption or ideological biases gets in the way of such things, there needs to be a secondary mechanism to hold them to account for essentially closing ranks.
Yes, but I think that we also need to talk about the immense rise in political violence over the past decade in this country. Because here's the thing: it's not just a jury by your peers. Because here's the thing: with the rise in political violence, a lot of juries are now deeply intimidated, and with the internet, people are now collaborating to find out who the juries are to basically threaten and intimidate them into either convicting or acquitting the people that they prefer. And I want to make it very clear: political violence in this country is largely from one particular side.
Mm-hmm.
The side Nancy Pelosi happens to operate in, if you're not aware. But also,
she kneeled for George Floyd and treated him like a saint. Just pointing that out there.
Also, jurors are supposed to be fair and impartial. Like, we recently had the Trump trial where he was convicted. But here's the thing: that was not a fair and impartial trial, in my opinion, because one, the judge, if you look at the way he acted and his connections to the Democrat Party, he's very clearly not on. He was very clearly biased, and also the jury pool you have to consider, because New York is a heavily Democrat city, and so Donald Trump, who was the previous president and also the current Republican front runner, like, it's going to be damn near impossible for him to have an unbiased jury pool. And also, going to the fact that Donald Trump was the previous president, it's going to be damn near impossible for any person in the country not to have one strong opinion of Donald Trump, especially considering how deep the political divide has gone in this country. It's going to be impossible to find someone who doesn't have a strong opinion on the man.
And what standard are we supposed to use, Nancy, if the rule of the people is in some way suspect or corrupt? Are we going to simply default to what norms and officials say? Because that seems to be your approach. Or are we going to actually dig down into the mechanics of the system and figure out not just why it is the case, but what use it is supposed to serve, what function it is supposed to have. If you're not concerned with the actual material functions of a system, if you're just concerned with abstract norms and moralities, then your system is going to collapse under its own stupidity and weight eventually. Which I suppose I shouldn't have told you because, as Napoleon once said, never interrupt your enemies when he is making a mistake.
Yeah, and I would just want to say that this political divide didn't get this bad over the last couple of years for like no reason. Academics and politicians like Nancy Pelosi herself have been doing their absolute best to take a pickaxe to that divide and widen it as far as possible. To the point where
By
people, even in foreign countries, are talking about the potential of another American Civil War.
yeah, by fundamentally decreasing the trust people have in their society and convincing a not inconsiderable portion of the country that their friends and neighbors are secretly subhuman demonic scum, i.e., Nazis, fascists, communists, and etc. Do you think it is reasonable to conclude that there could be a Nazi hiding under every rock? Because academia and the news media and corporations all seem to be moving in lockstep with the notion that yes, there are Nazis and fascists hiding and waiting behind every corner, and yes, society was, and always has been a fucking Bosch painting set to Wagner somehow. And no, you can't possibly treat your fellow humans like humans because they're secretly invalid people, don't you know?
And the way that they were able to get people to believe that is by convincing them that there was only one valid, correct moral opinion on any given subject. And
Yes,
so, if the person doesn't have that opinion, then clearly they are undiluted evil, and you must defeat them no matter the cost.
usually by violently assaulting them repeatedly and on the regular.
Yeah. All right, and play again.
Yep.
On the doors. So when we talk about populism and we talk about democracy, let's understand our terms today, not 200 years ago, but today.
That's another thing that these people like to do. They like to redefine terms. So the democracy that the founders set out as, well, that's not the democracy we have today, and we shouldn't act like it is. Like, no, we're supposed to hold on to this ideal of democracy, fight for it, and maintain it. Otherwise, the country is going to fall apart because the systems are going to be contradictory to one another because nobody knows what the other is talking about.
And again, Nancy, the entire history of the terms populism and democracy, for their entire history, those two concepts have been inextricably linked and borderline interchangeable with each other. You only want to make a temporal exception and focus on today's definitions of such things, specifically because you understand, at least academically, the notion that as a general rule, elitists and aristocrats bad, populist uprisings good. And yet, you really, really want that not to be the case in this one specific instance because you know full well that you are the next best thing to a queen, to a viscountess, goddammit. And so you really want to believe that the establishment was morally pure and perfect this one time, even though it's never been throughout all the rest of human history, and that the populist uprising this one time doesn't have any doesn't have any inconveniences that they ought to properly see redressed and shouldn't blame the institutions for, because these institutions, these norms are yours, and therefore they must be morally pure and perfect at all times and in all circumstances, in defiance of the pattern of every other time and every other instance of this phenomenon throughout all of human history, and not to mention the etymology of the goddamn words. Moving on.
And if you are humored by some of the named Ted Cruz and people like that, that may be humorous to you, but it ain't funny to us because it has a direct impact on what's happening. Now, here's the thing that is so sad about all of this. These people who are populist and go out there and make all these claims take advantage of people who have legitimate economic concerns.
By
In this
attempting to
day and age,
represent
people
them.
are
Yes, by talking and listening to people, you're clearly taking advantage of them.
By actually taking people at their word and not concocting some pseudo-academic, pseudo-moralist rigmarole passion play in your head about how there's a Nazi or a fascist or an undesirable deplorable behind every rock, and we have to be constantly vigilant of them, otherwise our civilization is going to crumble, herder derp.
Yeah.
Because
concerned, and some of you
that's the thing, Nancy. We're not the ones concocting some Orwellian meets Dantean conspiracy theory. You guys are by and large the ones doing that. Yes, there is occasionally the odd conservative who calls something communist when it isn't, or believes that Obama was born in Kenya or whatever the fuck. But they're not leading any sort of institutions. They're not leading any sort of grand armies. They're not leading any sort of cabal between the corporations, the news media, and the politicians. You guys are very much doing that, and you're doing that to basically all of the institutions. And again, you are turning what was once a very high trust society where people could at least see that, well, they disagreed with each other. There was a equanimity between them and they could see each other as fellow humans. You are turning that into an incredibly low trust society where you either have to believe that the world is some kind of Boschian hellscape rendering of 1984 and fascists and Nazis are hiding around every corner, or you're a morally invalid buzzword bad person who is just denying reality or some shit. Moving on.
And the thing is, the hilarious thing is that whenever I see videos of like a Trump rally, I usually do see people engaging in high trust behavior because they know that if they're there, that they probably hold similar values and want similar things, mainly an economy that works for them, so they can work hard and provide things for their families.
Mm-hmm. But to you, they're all just Nazis in waiting or some shit. And
Yes,
you
even the
think
black
that
ones.
makes you the rational and perfectly sensible person in the conversation. The person fear-mongering about people who have been dead for 70 years, by and large, is the reasonable person. And the person who just wants to be left alone to pursue their own ends and or destinies is the threat to all of our existence, somehow.
Yes, and the small number of people who still cling to that, outdated ideology, she's one of the reasons why they still do.
Yeah. Like, we're not the ones who put Richard goddamn Spencer on CNN, Nancy, because for some cockamamie reason, the establishment wanted to Nazi fight so freaking bad and needed to reach for one so fucking hard that they actually would rather believe that millions upon millions of people are like Richard goddamn Spencer than believe that they could possibly ever be wrong about a goddamn thing and in the wrong about a goddamn thing. Moving on.
So let's keep this planned because we're not even halfway through and we've already been talking for 43 minutes.
Yeah, let's
I
go.
say this before, are concerned about innovation. How are they and their families going to thrive and survive economically in a new era of innovation? They're concerned about globalization. They're concerned about immigration. They're concerned about anything new because it's not the familiar to them. And
They're not concerned about something new because, like, nobody was concerned that much when the freaking iPhone came out. They're concerned about things that are actively fucking them over.
Yeah, and by the way, speaking of people who are absolutely terrified of things that are new, Miss Pelosi, how do you feel about certain people on YouTube, like Carl Benjamin, or Voltaire's Ghost, or Count Dankula, or do you see what I'm getting at? We're not the people telling teachers and school administrators that you better keep your children from listening to Jordan Peterson or Carl Benjamin because it'll turn them into Nazis, don't you know? You are the one doing that. You're the one demonizing online radicalization. Never mind all the academic radicalization of Antifa members. Never mind that Hassan Piker is one of the largest voices on Twitch and Vosh is right behind him. Those people you don't consider radical, despite the fact that they very clearly and self-evidently are. But freaking Jonathan Haidt or Jordan Peterson or Gad Saad or Stephen Fry, they are radicalizing people because they're telling them that maybe your normative order isn't the greatest thing ever. But who's reacting against new things and calling it evil by reflexive default? Again, Nancy? Moving on.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm sorry that I stopped and went off because I just couldn't help it. It was just so damn.
No, the stupid is palpable. This is why I had to stop myself after listening to like 5 minutes of this and decide to watch it fresh when we watched it, because it was like I'm going to fall down a rabbit hole if I listen to any more of this bitch.
So
Moving
along
on.
comes a snake oil salesman, sells them a bill of goods, and then takes office, and the only legislation put forth is a bill that gives a tax bill that gives 83% of the benefits to the top 1%.
That's literally what the Democrats have been doing to black people for the last 60 years.
Yeah, please don't call the kettle black, Nancy, when, as far as you know, you're in blackface right now. It's not as though politicians haven't been doing that for 50, 60, 70 goddamn years at this point. And it's not as though you're not in favor of that, because let's be honest, that 1% that got that tax break was you and or your donors, wasn't it, Ms. Pelosi?
Is there a mirror off screen that she's looking at while she's saying all of this?
I would hope so. In a sane world, there would be a thing, but apparently not.
That has legislation to take away their health care. If that isn't enough for you, when we didn't have the bill to go give aid to Ukraine and the rest, the speaker said to me, I can't do it until I do the budget bill. What was holding up the budget bill? After giving a $2 trillion tax cut to the wealthiest 1% in our country, $2 trillion.
That they would have gotten anyway, even if Biden were elected.
Yeah, and not only that, but like she complained about, like these tax cuts. Here's the thing: nobody gave a damn about the tax cuts because the economy was good and people were thriving. You see that when things are actually going well, no one really gives a damn all that much. If the top 1% can shave off a couple of bucks,
because their primary concern is being left the fuck alone to thrive in their own little pockets of reality. Despite what your intro to philosophy professor must have taught you, Nancy, we don't want to eat the rich. We want to help the goddamn poor, please.
Yeah, either like if things are going well and people are able to, survive and thrive, the only people who are going to care about the 1% are the fucking communists. And fuck the communists.
Yeah. And fuck every other derivative of Hegel's bastarding historical dialectic, because it ruins everything it touches. Anyway, moving. Also, before we move on, actually, am I the only one who noticed that literally every sentence she says is like an incomplete run-on sentence that she basically just gives up whenever she loses breath?
I hadn't noticed it, but I'll keep an eye out for it going forward.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, though.
The national debt, unpaid for. The big issue that held us up at the end was something called WIC, Food for Women, Infants and Children, for new families. We can't afford to give that food. it's going to add to the national debt. That's what these purveyors of populism sold a bill of goods to these people who grasped it because they had legitimate concerns. Concerns that have to be respected and they have to be addressed. But the fact is that democracy can, since your 200-year-ago version, Andrew Jackson and all that, so much has happened that our distinguished person, I don't know your name, but thank you for your pro-argument. We've seen demagogues come down the pike, destroy the press. What is
Of which you are one, Ms. Pelosi. Of which you are one. And that is very much germane to the issue at hand here, because this is the thing. People who are comfortable being the aristocrats don't particularly like when the plebs get fed up with not being represented. And so they try to frame themselves as the morally pure and perfect ones, while demonizing everyone who disagrees with them, no matter how legitimate those cases are.
And here's the thing: if you wanted to fund a program for food for women and children, you could very easily do it. All you have to do is stop funding foreign wars and cut back on all the government spending, which Nancy Pelosi will never vote to do.
Yeah, instead of bickering back and forth every freaking 4 to 8 years, should we raise spending? Should we lower spending? Should we raise spending? Should we lower spending? Instead of raising or lowering a goddamn thing, perhaps we should be more concerned with more efficiently using what we're already goddamn spending. Because we have more financial resources than we could ever possibly need. We're just frittering it all away on stupid shit over and over again instead of figuring out how to efficiently utilize it in any meaningful way. Moving forward.
One of the reasons that we're going into debt is because despite all the taxes that our government frankly doesn't deserve, that we're still spending more than the taxes are coming in. So like you already have like all this money that you're extracting from the people, literally as much as you possibly can, and it's still not enough, and you're spending more and going. Like I swear to God, if the government was a business, it would have gone out of business a long damn time ago.
Yeah, despite the fact that we're all shareholders in it, allegedly. And that's the other thing. Back in the day, Ms. Pelosi, it was well understood that politicians in a democratic government of any kind were supposed to be the employees of the populace, the employees of the plebs. And yet, we pay you quite exorbitant wages. And yet, I don't feel particularly represented, and I don't know of anyone who does feel particularly represented. And your only answer to all those people who feel underrepresented is, the system works just fine. I don't know what you're complaining about. And also, if you complain, you're immoral and a bad person, and probably also a fascist and a Nazi, don't you know? You know, if you were in a job and your boss called you in for a performance review, and your response to all of his criticisms during that performance review was, if you have a problem with the way I do my work, then you're a Nazi, you would be fired on your ass. But you're not fired on your ass now because derp reasons, basically. Fuck the reasons. There are no reasons that I can reasonably expect to discern. Moving on.
Fake news. So they're diminishing that in the eyes of these poor souls who are looking for some answers.
Oh yes, the poor unfortunate plebeians who don't believe the trusted and vaunted purveyors of truth like CNN and MSNBC.
Yeah, and by the way, Trump didn't make anyone distrust these things. He was speaking to an already existent distrust in these things because it is self-evident that these things are not the objective purveyors of truth, nor do they even view being an objective purveyor of truth to be a goal in their minds. Because in journalism school, you're taught about the difference between being a stenographer to power and being a seeker of objective truth. And most journalists in today's day and age see objectivity as a wasteful fantasy land that there's no point in languishing in. So screw objectivity, it doesn't exist anyway, is very much the party line in most of academia and in particular in journalism schools.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It wasn't Trump. It was the media's reaction to Donald Trump that really put the final nail in the coffin, because when Trump won, they all lost their freaking minds and they started lying on the man basically 24/7. And because
The
of the internet
aforementioned
and
reality must be a Bosch painting bullshit. There must be a Nazi or a fascist hiding under every corner bullshit. Yeah.
because of the internet and the media, we can actually get fact checks on the mainstream media and see them lying in real time, and that really put the final nail in the coffin of the people's trust in these institutions.
Yeah, but because it's an institution, it must be more valid than anything that isn't an institution, don't you know? Yeah,
We've
moving
given
on.
them to them, but they're blocked by some of their views on guns. They have the 3 Gs: guns, gays, God. That would be a woman's right to choose.
One, people should be allowed to own guns. Two, what was number two? Number two was gays.
Yes.
Here's the thing: a lot of people stopped caring about the gays until they started pushing things way too fucking far.
Yeah, I happen to be one such individual, Nancy, and I'm not in favor of "we will convert your children," or not in favor of John Money's theories on gender, or not in favor of critical queer theory, just like I'm not in favor of any of the other critical theories. And frankly, Pride, especially as it relates to kink at Pride, is fine right up until the point when you introduce children into the mix, and then it ceases being fine. Just as not fine as it would be if we had straight pride parades and shit, primarily because exposing kids to sexuality at that young of an age is very likely to cause them psychological damage, lasting and permanent psychological damage from which there is no fixing unless they spend an inordinate amount of time in therapy, which, oh, by the way, the psychological profession, the psychological institution, also completely ideologically captured, but never the fuck mind.
Yeah, and also the last one being God. First of all, this country was founded by Christian men. Second of all, I think most of the people in the country are still religious. And two, Nancy Pelosi herself claims to be fucking Catholic.
Also, three, why should it matter what someone's justification for a belief system is when, again, the purpose of a democracy is to be populistic and essentially codify the general will to some extent. Now, we're a democratic republic, which somewhat mitigates and somewhat complicates matters, sure, but you specifically refer to our democracy as a thing, so playing the ball where it lies, Nancy, to what reasonable definition of democracy could you possibly say that being anti-populist is a good thing, given that populist and demos are literally the same goddamn word in 2 different languages? Moving on.
And the cultural issues cloud some of their reception of an argument that really is in their interest. I don't agree with you that we don't accuse people of not knowing what they're doing. They know what their personal interest is. We respect that. But the fact is that using whether it's people different from me, nationalism, populism, is a very dangerous threat to democracy.
It's also a fucking straw man.
Nancy, civic nationalism is a thing. Classically liberal nationalism is a thing. Even libertarian nationalism is a thing. It's not as though Hitler and Mussolini were the only people to ever develop the concept that countries should be separate entities that exist separate from one another. This is the thing. This is precisely the thing. We are trying to express to you that in pursuit of stamping out ethno-nationalism, you have also completely and utterly borked the possibility for civic nationalism, liberal nationalism, or libertarian nationalism. And all you can say is only people who are liars and would secretly be fascists would ever defer to nationalism as a positive thing. Derp. Moving on.
Just in America where we're seeing it play out, but in the whole world, in the context of a fight between democracy and autocracy. Not mine, but the version of populism, ethno.
That was a Freudian slip if there ever was one.
Did you see? She literally did the thing that I always talk about them doing whenever they say our democracy. See, this is an old chestnut of mine, but I really hate the phrase our democracy specifically because our democracy means democracy of the valid people, the people in the club, and the democracy of the people in the club is another way of saying aristocracy or autocracy, which she literally basically just Freudian slipped herself into because she literally sees democracy as something that is owned by her and her contemporaries, her peerages, and so on, and
I mean, Joe
not at
Biden
all,
one time.
and not at all by us plebs sitting here on the ground actually living in the result of their actions.
I mean, when referring to the Constitution, Joe Biden literally said, "We the people are the government."
Does he know what, like, declaring independence means in the context of the Constitution? Because Joe, you're old enough almost to have been contemporaneous to these people. You should know that, like, America wasn't its own country when that preamble was being written. It specifically referred to the former subjects of Britain no longer wishing to be subjects of Britain, i.e., it was referring to the people on the ground no longer being wanting to be subject to the crown, the parliament, the House of Lords, and of course the aristocracy. Do you see, Joe?
Yes, we the government have come together to lay down the foundation for this new government we have yet to form.
How? Oh dear, the brainworms have gotten to Joe's understanding of history. Oh dear, it's all down here from now. Anyway, moving on.
Nationalist populism, which tries to bring down education and fake news, the media, which is a protector of democracy.
The Freudian slip happened again. She referred to fake news and then immediately paired it with the media. Gee, Nancy, tell us how you really feel through the medium of Freud, I guess.
Contributing in countries other than our country and is a danger to democracy. We think democracy is on the ballot in America. It's a victory that we must win because it will only make matters worse if they have another stay at what they're doing to the courts in our country.
What they're doing to the courts, you just put your biggest political opponent on trial like some sort of banana republic.
Critical race theory, Nancy, literally got its start in the legalistic theory profession. So I don't particularly want to hear about how sacred the law is while critical race theory was deliberately and specifically spun out of legal theory professions. Moreover, if this democracy of yours is a non-populist or more likely anti-populist one, I don't want any part of it on the basis that I don't think I should subscribe to deliberately contradictory concepts. And there is scantly little more contradictory a concept can be on this grand a scale other than anti-populist democracy. That's like that's democracy opposing itself, which I suppose sounds good in theory if there were actually multiple sides to any given issue, but as we know, you and your donor class and your ilk really would rather there be essentially a single political consensus that both parties exist within the Overton window of. And you viscerally hate, distrust, and despise anyone outside of that Overton window, no matter which side they come from.
Yeah. And she's talking like the average person, you know, is being misled by the populace. Meanwhile, the whole reason that we have the term fake news is because we know that the media is constantly lying, and they very clearly have a left wing political bent to them.
Yeah, the patronizing, oh, the people are too stupid to think for themselves bullshit. It's also fundamentally contradictory to the whole point of either democracy or populism, Nancy. The aristocrats from old Europe probably would have agreed with you that the plebs are too stupid to govern themselves, but you are supposed to be the speaker of a house in a country that was founded on the idea that the crown and its assorted aristocracies could get fucked because the people are intellectually, morally, and agentively capable of deciding shit for themselves and can't be so stupidly misled like a herd of cattle. But you view yourself as the mother. You view yourself as the matriarch of a family, and you view all of America, all the plebs on the ground and on the streets and on the world that you don't deign to look at outside your window, are your children that you must like be a stewardess of. Well, fuck your elitism, Nancy. Most of the people you're talking about are fucking adults, or at least capable of political reasoning on their own terms. And the fact that you view yourself as so inherently superior to them, frankly, makes me want to resurrect the guillotine as a method of dealing with these sorts of politicians.
You know, frankly, I was just thinking, why couldn't this woman have been born to the late 18th century French aristocracy?
Yeah, you're literally doing the my kids are too stupid not to eat cake and to and so I have to ensure that they eat bread instead of cake. That's basically what she just said there. The people are too stupid to govern themselves, so we have to make sure that we act as parents to them. Yeah, no, we get fucked, Nancy. Your job was supposed to be a servant of the public, not its nanny or its mother or its school teacher. No matter how much like a bitter old shriveled up prune of a schoolmarm you seem to be.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi is the political equivalent of Munchausen by proxy. She would see her own constituents destroyed and then beg for sympathy in order to gain more votes and power.
Yep. Anyway, moving right along.
Fear that they're instilling in jurists in our country, the suppression of the vote in our country, the role of their big, dark, rich, billionaire donors who don't want to pay.
Again, I assume she's talking to the fucking mirror.
The ones you serve, Nancy, those ones that voter suppression that you engaged in, or at least someone at the New York Times or rather Time Magazine and its associated pressers all engaged in to fortify the election, to make sure the stupid plebs didn't do something that was against their own good, because we know what's good for you more than you do, Nancy. That whole thing.
Yeah, like,
taxes suffocating the airways from the fossil fuel industry and the gun industry and the rest of that. So money and populism, sadly, have gone together with this ethno-nationalist what they call elite, which we call education, free press, and the rest. So I urge you to think.
all the shit we don't have.
Yeah, Nancy, the press is only free if you give it the capacity to disagree with you and with the establishment. Education is only free when you give people the capacity to think for themselves, Nancy, education and the press are not made free by you giving them a party line to toe and then they toe it. That's not how anything is supposed to work.
Yeah, these people rely on low information voters because the people who are actually educated about what's actually going on in the government and what's going on around the country. I doubt
Think
that they
for
would vote for them.
themselves.
Yeah, I doubt they would vote for the Democrats, at least in their current manifestation. Like
Yeah.
I've seen, like I feel a
The
lot of people who like you go to these rallies about Democrat talking points, like say like Palestine or abortion, and very few of them will actually know what they're talking about or even know what the other side is arguing for.
yeah. Because again, we have to see the people outside of our framework as subhuman immoral monsters, because if they weren't subhuman immoral monsters, then we might have to learn something from them, which also means that we have the capacity to not just be wrong, but to act on wrong information, therefore making the wrong decisions.
In terms of the word, it says it's a threat. You're going to deny that it's a threat to democracy in the versions that have emerged in America so clearly? And why
Yes,
does
Nancy,
anybody
I'm
here
going to
say to
deny it
me,
because those
what
two things are
happens if he gets
synonyms.
elected?
Yes.
Because populism and democracy are synonyms to each other, and any institution or establishment that wants a anti-populist democracy, as if such a thing is even technically possible, is so ideologically warped that I wouldn't trust them to hand out ice cream to children, let alone run a goddamn country, let alone the most powerful hegemonic country in the world.
Also, I just want to put this out there. American populism, Pelosi, is not the straw man that you have made and spewed out in the Oxford Union. Look, damn near no one is talking about ethno-nationalist populism, and it's certainly not the main populist movement in America.
No, there are so many other possible versions of nationalism or populism that you could possibly have alluded to. But the problem is, you want the nationalism in question to be ethno-nationalism because that is a enemy you could actually reasonably fight. That is a case where you actually would have the moral high ground. That is, to use a slightly condescending metaphor, the test you studied for. The test you studied for was the Nazis are coming back and we have to be the noble ones fighting them. But unfortunately for you, the Nazis, such that remain in the modern age, are either so niche as to be irrelevant, or so stupid and mockable as to be irrelevant. Therefore, despite the fact that you studied for the test of fighting Nazis, there simply aren't that many Nazis to be fighting, and the ones that there are to be fighting are so irrelevant that it seems like a waste of resources. So your only other recourse is to broaden the definition of Nazi so far that people who are nowhere near the concept of Nazi are now in the category of Nazi, so that you can actually fight the test you can actually ace the test you studied for, rather than dealing with the one that's actually in front of you. No wonder you're about to get an F on it, Nancy. Moving on.
Well, you can't let that happen because for us, this election is Washington crossing the Delaware. This is about a democratic, no offense to the Brits, no offense to the
I just want to stop for a second. The arrogance of this woman.
Yeah, the aristocratic pompousness is what it is. She should be wearing a powdered wig and a fucking massive dress with all the girls and frillies
Yeah,
in
Nancy would
there.
be the type of Nancy would be the one cozying up to the British. We all know it.
She would be she would have defected during the Revolutionary War back to Britain, because she would be the governor's wife of like the governor of Massachusetts or something, and therefore would side with the British against the Americans, because she literally just said, I'm sure she agrees with Joe Biden's supposition that we the people refer to the government, because let's be honest, Biden doesn't have the mental capacity to come up with original thoughts of his own anymore. So I'm reasonably sure that either Kamala or Pelosi told him to say that, or some variation of it.
All right, let's keep playing because we're already over an hour.
Yep.
Brits. But the fact is also that what happened here at Runnymede, the Magna Carta, yes, the first parliament and the rest of that, has a great contribution to democracy in the world, but our country was founded on the principle that all people are created equal. A constitution that tried to implement that wasn't perfect from the beginning, but they were able to amend it to end slavery and all the other remnants of
People
what came
created
before.
equal and therefore with an equal capacity to govern themselves, Ms. Pelosi. That's the unfortunate canard that you find yourself in, because you're having to argue in favor of democracy while simultaneously also arguing against populism. And these two things are virtually synonymous with one another, or at least implicitly connected to one another, because they're the same goddamn word in two different languages. And more to the point, you once again overlooked the idea that the use of democracy, the use of populism, is to curtail and frustrate bloated elitist institutions and establishments as and when they get too out of touch or too tyrannical. But if you became aware of this canard, Miss Pelosi, you might finally have your Mitchell and Webb style "Are we the baddies" moment. And
Shoot.
frankly, at this point, that is the only way you could possibly save your soul from the deepest ranks of hell at this point. And you might want to work on that, Nancy, because you are not long for this world. Because, my God, woman, you look like the Crypt Keeper was your plastic surgeon.
I don't think Nancy Pelosi will ever realize just how wrong she is regarding democracy, populism, and politics. She will die on this hill.
And then be plunged into the deepest, darkest depths of hell.
But populism in the version of Andrew Jackson, which was described here, is not the threat that we are talking about. That's part of it. But the fact that's so sad is a misrepresentation of people who exploit the populist attitude of, I want to have my say, and then use it to get elected and then hurt those people the most. Hurt those.
I'm so glad she's confessing her sins here.
Yeah, the mirror again, Miss Pelosi. You are condemned to the mirror. Get in the mirror. Seriously.
People the most with it, as I say, unfair taxation, unfair distribution of resources. A budget should be a statement of our national values. Instead, it's a vehicle to put more money in the pockets of his contributors. And on top of all of that, taking away health care and the rest by lying about it all. That's about.
Will that be the end of your deposition, Miss Pelosi? Does this conclude your confession? Because at this point we're entering please face the wall now territories of you admitting your fuck ups.
Yeah, like she should have just pleaded the fifth, because anyone who knows anything about American politics knows that Nancy Pelosi is basically talking about all the things she herself is doing. I mean, is there any time when speaking about politics do these people not fucking project?
Well, because they literally have to believe that they are not guilty of any of the shit that they do, and that everyone else is more guilty of what they do than they are. Because if they had the self-awareness to admit to doing all these shitty things, they might once again have their light bulb moment of, wait, maybe I'm on the wrong side of this. And that would probably kill her at this point. It would probably give her a heart attack, and she couldn't survive a heart attack at her age at this point. Moving along.
Abortion, it's not about any of that. So if there could be truth in their message, I think that people would react differently because they would know quite clearly how it affects them and their lives, where they know better than anybody their kitchen table concerns.
That is how they're
and how
reacting,
they can pay
Nancy.
the bills, educate their children, save for retirement, pay the rent, and the
That is
rest of
precisely
that.
how they are
For my
reacting. You are describing reality as though it is a fanciful state of could be's and have beens, and you are describing the opposite of reality as if it is dead certain. Because here's the thing. This would clear up your Gordian knot of a brain right now, okay? The way you're describing people reacting is how they are reacting, and the way that you're assuming that they are reacting is literally the exact opposite of anything that is really happening. And the second you realize the people you're describing reacting that way is exactly how people are reacting, is the moment when the light bulb will turn on and you will realize just how thoroughly wrong and on the wrong side of every goddamn issue you happen to be. I'm not holding my breath, though. I fully suspect you will die without making this realization. And I feel sorry for you in that sense, but given all the terrible shit you've done, you do deserve your place in the deepest ring of hell, my dear. Right alongside Miss Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Friends, this is interesting academically, intellectually, and the rest, but on the ground,
You have absolutely no idea what's going on.
Yeah, she's so detached from the average person that she only has her warped opinion about them to go on.
Well, this is the point at which she is absolutely 100% upside down, because she's describing reality as it exists as some high-minded academic abstraction, and she's describing her high-minded academic abstraction as though it is reality. It's literally completely upside down and back to front. Abstraction is reality, and reality is just this fanciful abstraction we're playing with for the sake of the debate. How could someone possibly go that far upside down? It's utterly baffling. It's like a Lovecraft story.
Yeah. All right, we hit play.
Mm-hmm.
The version that we see now is a threat to democracy that's really hard to deny. I was eager to hear their arguments, but what I heard could have been made 200 years ago and not facing the realities that we see. So I urge you all to vote in favor of the proposition, and again, with respect for the presentations that we had. And really, Sultan, I was ready to vote for you for one of those positions. I really was. But I'm not sure now because I don't know that you could possibly believe the presentation. I know this is academic, so maybe you believe it. I respect that. But what I do respect is our democracy. And just tell you one more thing. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, where our national anthem was written by Francis Scott Key. And he wrote a beautiful thing in the national anthem, and it's our motivation right now in some of our campaigning. He said, "Proof through the night that our flag was still there."
Much to your disappointment, I'm sure.
Ms. Pelosi, my dear, you are at this very moment deferring to something historical, having just literally a second ago condemned your interlocutors for living in the past. while simultaneously denying that the president of 200 years ago would have any bearing on the way that the world is today. Well, I hate to break it to you, Miss Pelosi, but those who do not understand history are condemned to repeat it. And unfortunately for you, you are playing for Team Marie Antoinette this time around. You're not playing for Put Upon Rebel. You're playing for Team Cunt, and Team Cunt usually loses.
Yes.
Just
And
saying.
also, here's the thing: like she mentioned, like the national anthem, like, but it's ridiculous because, like, oftentimes in America, like especially with the left-wing politicians in the press, they will describe basically anyone who is flying the American flag as essentially being right-wing.
As a fascist.
They'll often say that the right wing has co-opted the American flag. It's the flag of the nation. How could they possibly co-opt it unless you've abandoned it?
Yep. Because you believe that patriotic pride in one's nation is something had by Hitler and only Hitler, and therefore any example of pride in one's nation must be some soft-core version of Hitler. As if Hitler was the first motherfucker ever to propose a populist nationalist perspective on anything. As if there haven't been dozens of examples prior to him and after him of people deferring to the pride in the nation and it having nothing whatsoever to do with ethnicity or bloodline or anything along those lines.
All right,
Moving on.
Yeah, we're almost done here.
We're gonna have to do a part 2 of this if we want to
Truth
get to Winston's bit there.
Yeah, where he absolutely just demolishes her.
Yeah.
Supporting democracy, supporting our flag and all it stands for, and it is threatened by this version of populism that exists today. Please vote aye. Thank you.
Okay.
You are threatened by the populism that exists today, Ms. Pelosi, because and only because you are, as mentioned, playing for Team Aristocrat. And you do at least have a vague understanding of what happens to Team Aristocrat when the plebs get sick of dealing with the aristocrat shit. Unfortunately for you, the rules remain the rules whether you like them or not, and so no amount of you saying, but I'm the one exception, I'm the good aristocrat, or my aristocracy is the good aristocracy, is going to get you out of what is inevitably going to happen when the heads start getting lopped off and the guillotines start descending. With the possible exception of the fact that you're a woman, and very often the female aristocrats survive long enough to stoop the next guy and raise his successor. Which I did have to throw in at least a little bit because, we are the duality of man, and therefore I do find it remarkably ironic that the person playing for Team Aristocrat at this particular moment is one of the most iconic women in the last political zeitgeist.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's interesting that this debate is supposed to be about whether or not populism is a threat to democracy, but she keeps not talking about the um, basic concept of populism, instead attacking the straw man of the populism today, which isn't even an accurate representation of the populism occurring today.
Because that's the test she studied for. She studied for the test where she's fighting Nazis, and therefore she is morally perfect and can do no wrong. And so the notion that the populism and nationalism that she's addressing isn't in any way ethnocentric, but is instead a civic and classically liberal populism and or nationalism does not even occur to her, apparently.
She's not fighting Nazis though, and she's fighting the deplorables, which just if that wasn't the biggest mask off moment of the last century in American politics.
Well, I mean, yes, but I'm trying to see things through her lens, and in her head, the deplorables are equivalent to Nazis, fascists, and all the other unmentionable untermentions.
Yes. Do you have any final words for Miss Pelosi here?
Just fuck off, cunt. That's all that needs. That is my closing statement at this point.
Yeah. Please leave. You are genuinely awful on like every conceivable level.
And also the fact that our political class is populated mostly by people over the age of 80 is indicative of something else about people being out of touch and wanting and needing to get the fuck out of the way lest the populist regime run them over in an attempt to rebalance things.
All right, buddy. I've been Mr. E.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality Man. Cheers, guys.
Goodbye,
Be
everybody.
populist.